start the afternoon session. First speaker is Mrs. Mrs. Marina Khabenskaya, graduated from St. Petersburg State University, Department of Romance Languages and Portuguese Studies, and later on graduated the University of Minho with a master's degree in Portuguese and comparative linguistics. She's a lecturer in Russian language at the University of Aveiro since 2016. And presently a PhD student of Jewish Studies at the University of Paulo. Please.
The oral sources come from the children of Polish and Russian Jews who immigrated to Portugal. So we are referring to the second generation people who were already born in Portugal, most of them in 1930s, 1940s. All these interviews were conducted by me, as I already said, and were held here in Lisbon. Others were held in Israel as several families immigrated to Israel from Portugal in the early 50s. The first Jews from Eastern Europe came to Portugal before the First World War. There were just a few people, all of them from Russia, and they were well educated, had a certain intellectual and professional level. Most of them came to Portugal to continue working in their professional areas, mostly engineering and medicine. Most of these European Jews settled in Lisbon, however later in the 90s. In the 1920s, there were already some Ashkenazi Jewish families living in Portugal.
You cannot hear.
No?
Speak into the microphone.
Okay. Thus, the leadership of the first Jewish community in Porto was mainly comprised by Jews coming from the Russian territories. In the image, you can see the document with the status of Porto's Jewish community dated July 27, 1923. The governing body of the community included the president, Artur Basto, and the secretary, Giuseppe Levi. All the other members of the board, the vice president, the treasurer, and two voting members, were Russian Jews. Most of the Jewish immigration from Poland to Portugal occurred between the two world wars. The influx of Polish immigrants intensified between 1926 and 1932 and reached its peak between 1928 and 1930. When talking about Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe to Portugal, you have to take into account that the number of immigrants who came to Portugal was much smaller when compared to the massive streams that sought the United States or Latin America. To get an idea of the number of Polish Jews who settled in Portugal, we went through the archives of the Portuguese National Institute of Statistics. In the 1930 census, which unfortunately only provided nationality, there were 172 Polish people living in Portugal. Because at that time there were almost no Polish Christians in Portugal, we can always assume that most of the 132 people were Polish Jews. The census also included the 47 Russians that were living in Portugal at that time. In this case, we do believe it is wise to question this number since the
pessoas que não estão inscritas não podem existir. As pessoas que não estão inscritas não podem existir às fãs. Não, quer dizer, vocês estão inscritas, mas para assistir às sessões as pessoas têm que se inscrever. Mas não se inscreveu, portanto não pode assistir. As pessoas estão inscritas às sessões só com a autorização ou inscritas. Portanto, não pode assistir às sessões. Tem que estar inscrito. Nada.
Peço desculpa. We were talking about 47 Russian Jews in 1930s, according to the census. And in this case, we do believe it is wise to question this number, since there was a community of white Russians who came to Portugal after the revolution. We can, however, say that some of the Jewish activists who were part of the Jewish community that were from the Russian territory, such as Wolf, Leon Wittgenstein, and some others, were also enrolled in the Russian community officially. The information available in the 1940 census already included nationality and religion. This information allowed us to extract more precise numbers. In 1940, 478 of the 1,120 Polish citizens claimed to be Jewish. According to the same census, 12 of the 70 Russians also claimed to be Jewish. In terms of numbers, we can also say that we were able to identify by analyzing the archives of the Portuguese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and some personal archives around 100 people, where each person represented one family. For most Polish Jews, Portugal was a crossing point, a halfway stop before heading towards the United States or Latin America. There were people who, for one reason or another, did not fit into the organized flow of immigrants with a well-defined itinerary either to the Americas or to Palestine. Moses' brother, in his interview, said that his father wanted to go to Palestine. Since he was not able to disembark, he decided to come to Portugal to visit a friend who had settled in Portugal a few months prior. One of the reasons they may have encouraged people to look for new destinations was the fact that in the late 1920s, immigration restrictions comprised familiar routes. The large-scale bulks that occurred until World War I were hindered by the new restrictions imposed by the United States and other Western countries. Palestine, under British governments at that time, essentially closed its doors. Immigration to Argentina was hampered by the crisis the country was experiencing. The right-wing policy gained strength in the countries around Poland, Germany, Hungary, Romania, Lithuania, and Austria. And in 1929, it was already difficult to leave this opportunity, and there were not many people wanting to go there. Dina Kidd, in the interview given in Haifa, the city where she has lived for almost 60 years, said that her father came from Poland in 1929. The decision to immigrate was taken when he was beaten in his own house. He wanted to go to America but decided to stay in Lisbon. This whole scenario indicates that choosing Portugal, a hospitable and exotic destination of the other end of the continent, was a spontaneous decision and temporary stay, since the other options to be more difficult. As already mentioned, Russian Jews came to Portugal before World War I started and were highly qualified professionals. The Polish came later on. Some of them started out as vendors selling items such as needles and scissors, ties or eyeglasses frames, but with time they reached greater stability and began branching into other areas. Most of the Polish Jews were involved in the knitting trade. They had factories, albeit small, with rarely more than 30 workers, and employed Portuguese people. The wool was bought in Iberia, and when made, the products were sold to the warehouses. Each family had, let's say, its own warehouse, so there was no competition in this sense. Clara Capitecasuto recalls her grandfather's factory. Most of the Polish Jews settled in Lisbon around Avenidas Novas and Avenida Almirante Taix, which were reasonably close to the synagogue. The factories were close to home, around Avenida Almirante Taix and Avenidas, whereas the commercial offices were located in downtown Lisbon. The Stein family started in Lisbon, working in the police schools. Later they moved to Porto. Madame Stein stores still exist today keeping the store name site in the very heart of one of the most central streets, Marina and South families. Other families made orchards. A small family business that made timepieces was opened in the early 30s by the Khabenskaya family. This small family business grew into what is today well-known brand in Portugal, Other families sold knickknacks and small gadgets that came from France, Germany, and Switzerland, and were still difficult to find in Portugal. The fact that they knew German and the reality of those countries made it possible for them to use their knowledge to create a business in a new country. Other families organized small companies and imported and exported various goods. The Portuguese community regarded some families' professional activity very highly. This was the case of the Portuguese family. In 1914, the Portuguese family of Aveiro came to Portugal. The two Portuguese daughters were married, one, Marina, of Asia, to Mr. U.S.A. The other, Marina, of Aveiro, to Mr. Lieberman. The gentlemen were engineers and both came to work as civil engineers on the railroad tracks in northern Portugal. According to one of the versions told in the family, Wolf the Law, a Russian Jew, one of the most prominent figures of the Jewish community, was a friend of the family and invited them to come to Portugal as well as some other families. The Lieberman family ran the pharmacy situated in Avenida das Repúblicas. The two sisters' parents, Joseph and Chifra Portuguese, were pharmacists. They created a drug to fight tuberculosis that was called Rozenchan. This is the testimony of the great Mrs. Lieberman in our translation. I remember when I was little going there and putting the labels of the products, the medicine. They had this drug Rozenchan to fight tuberculosis. It is said that Paulo's mother brought the recipe from Odessa. It is said that she was a magical person. I watched people come and cry and kiss my uncles and aunts' hands to thank them for the miracle cure for tuberculosis. And besides it, it was good for the skin. Unfortunately, the pharmacy closed many years ago, and that secret has been lost. This is an extensive thank you to the creator of Rozenchan. Here you can see just a small part of it. Domingos Almeida Miranda, a cured patient, said that he fell ill in June 1930. After a short time, Domingos was hospitalized with a high fever. He spent 3 months in the hospital using the previously prescribed drugs and taking the vaccine. However, the X-rays revealed a large cavity in the right lung and some damage on the left. Still in the hospital, he received a visitor, a friend who knows people who had been in similar situations and that had been killed using Rozenchan. Domingos began taking Rozenchan on January 8, 1931. As he writes in his acknowledgement message, on the second day of treatment with Rozenchan, the fever subsided. After 3 or 4 days, the heart disappeared. Feeling better and without vomiting, I left the hospital with an appetite and sleeping better. During his treatment with Rozenchan for some months, he took tests. The latter were negative. The doctors were really surprised because the first X-rays led to believe that his death was near. By talking about the Jews of Eastern Europe, I have to refer to the unique areas of Ashkenazi. His archives are in the Portuguese National Library, and his life has been described in several articles written by Luciano Mushik and by Nasser Stenya. I will leave just with a brief summary. He was born in Lugansk in 1988. In eastern Ukraine, he's a family of Jewish merchants. But at the age of 15, impressed by Julio Vere's books, he leaves his home in search of adventures around the world. He secretly boarded the cargo ship to London and then also casually traveled to the United States. When he worked in a factory, 3 years later, Rozenchan returned to Russia and discovers a book written by the Polish author, Bredziko Food, and decides to become an advocate of nature and spread his philosophy abroad. He settled in Lisbon around the year 1920, where he continued to spread his ideas on nature. He founded Portuguese Nature Society in Lisbon, And one of the greatest emanates of his philosophy was the writer Marina, who was also a naturalist. They became friends, and he also became friends with the famous Portuguese poet and intellectual Fernando Pessoa, who wrote the preface to his book, Poems Alma Perante, and translated his autobiography in English. He was an actor in 3 Portuguese films, but trained Russians. He really stood out in the community because of his adventurous life experience, extravagant behavior, and creative ambitions. He was different from the other members who were probably much more grounded and with totally different concerns and goals. I suggest to watching him acting. In this film, Portuguese film, he sings a Russian lullaby written by himself for this movie. In the early 1930s, the Jewish community of Lisbon had a few hundred members from Eastern Europe. These people possessed a Jewish identity of their own based on ethnic rather than religious criteria. They spoke Yiddish and had a slightly different tribe. They were active Zionists with a different mentality shaped by their country of origin. These differences, which were apparent between these and the German Jews who began to come to Portugal after 1933, became even sharper when compared to the Sephardic Jews. From these differences emerges a natural desire to create their own spaces. Although the Jewish community of Lisbon already had a Shaareki synagogue built in 1904, as well as other various social associations and charities, the Polish Jews created their own spaces. On November 15, 1944, the Heriakov synagogue, known as the Polish synagogue, was officially opened. The Polish synagogue was a place for more traditional Polish Jews who, for some reason, could not attend or did not want to attend the main Shaareki synagogue. However, there were many people who went to both synagogues. Moses Reagan, president of the Association of Polish Jews, said, as his son recalls, that at big celebrations, his father went from synagogue to synagogue because nostalgia led him to one and his sense of obligation to another. Another institution that was founded by Polish Jews was called the Association of the Polish Jews. It was established in 1938 and lasted 10 years. It adopted the name in Yiddish, Verein von Polish Juden, which meant the Association of Polish Jews. In 1945, it had 100 members. However, the official name was Association of Polish Citizens. In 1945, the association asked the Portuguese government for permission to change the name to Association of Polish Jews, because by the original status, the members had to be Polish. However, since all the members were Jews, although some were not in fact Polish, they could not become effective members. We have now a possession of the document from the civil government of Lisbon and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with information and opinions to support the claim that the proposed changes could not be authorized due to superior political, moral, and legal principles. Association of Polish Jews was a deeply Zionist, civic, and social association. It had a library, organized lectures, trainings, and meetings. During the war, the association helped the immigrants, and immediately after the war, and for some years, it was dedicated to establishing contacts with the Jewish state of Israel. We cannot deny the fact that East European Jews opted to have received and integrated into the Israeli community with some disagreements with the well-established Sephardic community of Lisbon. There is an opinion that such problems were due to religious right differences or because the Sephardic Jews were wealthy with a high social status, while the Ashkenazi were poor immigrants. In our opinion, these were not the real issues. First, the right was not significantly different. Neither group was that religiously devoted so as to divide the community. Second, we found the archives of Jewish Community of Wisdom pensions book dated 1925. It was a book of the community members in need. Almost all of them are Sephardic Jews of Moroccan origin. In 1924, there were almost no Jews from Poland. When we refer to Sephardic Community of Wisdom, we must not forget that this community was made up of Jews from Gibraltar, who arrived in the late 18th century and early 19th century and that were English. They were in fact very wealthy families with a high social standing. Some of these families still have proof that the ancestors lived in Lisbon prior to the Inquisition. One of our sources, Mr. Samuel Levy, still remembers the deposit that his father organized on the day of his birth. Moroccan Jews arrived throughout the 19th century. Some were mentioned middle class, some low middle class, some with the intention of going to the United States of America. And only a few families had great resources and belonged to the aristocracy. These, together with the Jews of Gibraltar, were the elite not only of the Jewish community of Lisbon, but also of the Portuguese society. They regarded the Jews who came from the East and all the Moroccan Jews who settled in Portugal as serving the state. We believe that it is crucial to consider what the Jews brought with them from their countries of origin, the culture, language, mentality, and history of the land where they were born. Poland in the 1920s had a very big Jewish cultural life, visible through the intense political life within the community that had reached its peak. Eurasianism and socialism, left and right-wing parties, modern Hebrew schools and English schools, Yiddish literature and theatre, Jewish press in English, Hebrew and Polish, just to name a few of the swirling activities. And the young Polish Jews who came to Portugal were accustomed to a very dynamic and politically active life. In Portugal, Jews participated more actively in the cultural aspects of life of the national majority and were not attracted by the various forms of Jewish nationalism. In our opinion, the Jewish world is not homogeneous or even united. The Jewish community of Lisbon comprised Jews of different origins: Gibraltar, Morocco, Germany, Austria, Poland, and Russia. And all of them, in the first generation, along with their Jewish identity, brought the language, culture, mentality, and the tradition of their country of origin. A Jew sometimes has to do consciously or unconsciously a choice between three options: preservation of his or her identity, assimilation, or immigration in search of the best possible conditions. Most of the Eastern European Jews who came to Portugal chose to preserve their identity, united by their language and common cultural and historical heritage. They built their own synagogue, created their own association. The foundation of this governing body allowed us to treat this group of people as a community.
Going on with the shifting identities, Eastern Europe to Syria, Dr. Sarina Roffe is the next speaker. Sarina Roffe is with a passion for Sephardic studies and recognized expert on the Syrian Jewish community. Roffe is of Aleppan descent, and her experiences as a member of Brooklyn's Syrian Jewish community provide an insider's perspective for her work. She is the founder of the Sephardic Heritage Project, whose mission is identifying, translating, and databasing genealogical records, as well as preserving Sephardic history. And she is the author of, she authored 2 books branching out from Chabad, and the other is Backyard Kitchen on Mediterranean Salad. Please.
Thank you. Hi, how are you? So, how many of you watch mysteries on TV, police shows, things like that? Anybody? Anybody watch police shows on television? They always say follow the money, right? So here we're going to follow the names, right? We're going to find those Sephardic Jews who went from Spain to Portugal to Aleppo to America. And so that's what we're doing here today. So this is Iberia in 1479. And in 1479, we know that there are many that there's a very, very fluid border here, that people are going back and forth between Spain and Portugal. Zamora is in the northwest part of west of Valladolid, but it's off the Douro River, which is very close to Porto. Porto goes all the way through from Spain. I'll show you. The names adopted in, we know, 1492 Jews get expelled, and 1497 more than half of the Jews in Spain are going to Portugal. The king welcomes them. There are conditions they're really only supposed to stay a year, or less than a year, 9 months. That was the original contract. But when we look at the names of the people who were forcibly converted, right, in 1497, he wants to marry the princess of Spain, and the Spanish monarchs say, hey, you got to get rid of your Jews. So he doesn't want to get rid of his Jews because they bring this wonderful middle class and they drive the economy of Portugal. So instead of letting them go, he gathers them at the port, he sprinkles holy water, and he says, you're Jews. Very hard to be one day Jewish and one day Catholic, but that's basically what happened. So they have to adopt Christian surnames. And what surnames do they adopt? Well, the Christian chronicles are silent on this, the Jewish chronicles are silent on this, but Don Manuel allows them to take names from noble families, okay? And if we examine some of the names, we see some things that happen with those names. So, for example, some of the names, Marina, Meneses, Albuquerque, what I've done is I've highlighted in red the names that I see today in Brooklyn, New York, in the Sephardic Jewish community. So I know that these are families that went from Spain to Portugal to Aleppo to the Americas, okay? The Converso families transmitted their secret Jewish names to their descendants, but they showed that they had this double identity, that they identified as Jews, they kept those names secret, but at the same time they had a Christian surname, okay? Now sometimes these names have a meaning, sometimes they come from a place. So we know that sometimes they come from the animal world, sometimes they come from the vegetable world, like aloe vera is olive tree. Physical characteristics. Moreno means dark skin, negro, blanco. These are names that we see every day, okay? Geographical features like rivers, mountains, tools, and crafts. Practically all the surnames that we found, according to a study by Dr. Nowinski, all the surnames repeat the names of Portuguese families that have a coat of arms. Some members of the same family may have different surnames. So you could have two or three siblings with 3 different surnames. They converted and each took a different surname. So you could have people in the same exact family with completely different names. But after 2 or 3 generations, the new Christians, they start to give back the names of the grandparents to their descendants, okay? And they have surnames, sometimes they have surnames that are exactly the name as old Christians. The majority of the Converso names reflect cities and villages, okay? So here we have some cities and villages, and some of these names were seen in the Ottoman Empire. So they're like Cordoba, Catalan. Now those are Spanish, they're not Portuguese, but I think you see where I'm going with this, okay? So these are some common names that were adopted by conversos. Alvarez, which is a parish. Azalida, it's a province of Minho. Correa, Cordosa. Costa, Diaz, Fernandez, Fernandez, Lopez, Alvarez, Cordosa. These are all names that I see today in the Sephardic community that I live in, okay? These are also some surnames, okay? Corregas, Silva, Valle, Nunez, Mendez. And this is from the Book of Guilty. So the Book of Guilty is a list of Portuguese new Christians, okay, who were suspected of heresy, by the Inquisition, and it has the names of 1,819 conversos who were imprisoned or suspected of Judaizing, and that lived in Brazil in the 18th century. Okay, so these are all. This was 1,098 men and 728 women. Now, these are families who ended up in Aleppo, Syria, which is where my ancestors come from. And you see the same names. The names keep repeating. Now, not all of the names are Portuguese. Some of them are Spanish. Some of them are French. My favorite is this Casson. I'm going to talk a little bit about him. I have a doctor named Silvera. My internist is named Silvera. Franco is a very prominent name in my community. They go to Italy. Paredes and Pardo, they're two different names, but I think really they're variations. Lisbona, and that's a name in my community. Okay? These are also families with these are known Portuguese names. So Pichota, it was with an X before it became with the two C's, because they went to Italy in between. Grazi means gracious. Carrera. So now I want to talk about this guy. So this guy, I was hired to do a genealogy of my chief rabbi. So my chief rabbi's family comes to me and they say, our family tree starts with this guy, Senor Shlomo Katzin, ends up in Aleppo in 1540. But when I looked at it, I thought, I worked with the family tree. I took Roffe from 1540 to the current generation, but it always bothered me about what happened from 1492 to 1540. Plus, he doesn't have a kid for like another 40 years. So I'm thinking, he's really old to be having his first kid. So it turned out that there was a grandfather, this Shlomo Katzin, who had been born in 1465, probably in Segovia. And he married this Estrella HaKohen. He may have converted using the name Francisco Katzin, but he's still using the name Casson. And new Christians didn't use their same names. So that was very suspect to me, but I still have documentation. He lived in Zamora, which is very close to the border of Portugal near the Douro. So you see Zamora, right? You see the border there. You see Formicella, where Gina Milgram wrote her book, My 15 Grandmothers, and she traces her family to that little town. And she talks about how in these little towns, there's a lot of fluidity back and forth because the borders change over time. And the practices of many of the conversos as secret Jews, places that she found where she would find a mikvah or something like that. So the Casson that I had been looking at was this guy, who turned out was born in 1501 in Zamora. He's the guy who comes to Aleppo. So going back 2 generations, we've got this guy and this guy who were the children of Senor Shlomo and Estrella, right? But where was he until 1540? What happened? That's 48 years. That's a lot of time, right? So we find in the Spanish archives this document showing that he's in Zamora in 1492, right? And here's the translation. I, Shlomo Katzin, neighbor of the city of Zamora, at the service of the royal house of Trastamara, and the treasurer of the Alhama, Jewish quarter of Zamora, and the neighboring provinces, I surrender the assets and estates of my wife, Estrella HaKohen, and likewise I declare that the properties of Juan Martinez del Campo, converso of the city of Salamanca, and Yom Tov Ben Zara, a Jew of the city of Zamora, and his mill in the Duero River, they both give the income tax aligning themselves, that is said to the Queen, to the most excellent city council of Zamora on the 5th day of April, 1492. Okay, so this is April 1492, before the expulsion. Okay? Okay. And you see here again, you see that Duero River, and he's got a factory over here, a mill. Okay. Now, we find him now in 1495. In 1495, he's in Barcelona selling gold, still using the name Shlomo Katzen. And I'm like, what's going on here? If you're a new Christian, how can you have the same name? So it turns out that Katzen is not just a Jewish name, it's a Christian name. If you actually just search in the phone book, you find that name all over the place, all over the world as a non-Jewish name, because it means head of the community. This is a seal that he used in documents. So then I find this document. This is the document showing he was selling jewelry in Barcelona, right? Now, where does it go? I'm still looking for what happened after 48 years. So I'm only down to 45 years. So I find him in Italy. I find him in Italy with a whole bunch of Portuguese, okay? Again, see these names? Silveira, Flores, Cassen, Gimby. And the documentation shows that the families are from Aragon, Castilla, Lisbon, and Porto. And they go to Italy at the beginning of the 16th century, right? So you're talking about early 1500s, right? So this is the document, and what I did here, this little section over here is a translation of this up here in the yellow. And basically it's saying India originated from Aragon, apparently is in Zaragoza. Other families like Franco originated, the name suggests, in France. The Cassins apparently were Jews. French settled in the area of Pisa, and we found them in a single generation as Cassini. Beta originated from Castilla, and even if in the red it is established in Livorno, I will spend some years in Pisa too. So this is a testimony from this book, okay, which is about Jews in the Ottoman Empire. So now, right, we know that a lot of Jews went from Italy to different places. We find the same families in Aleppo and Damascus. So Aleppo and Damascus, you have to understand, were not part of the Ottoman Empire until 1560, right? So nobody's going there until they're part of the Ottoman Empire. 1516, they become part of the Ottoman Empire, but the living conditions are different than they were in, let's say, Italy. Because in the Ottoman Empire, Jews lived as dhimmi. So dhimmi was a classification of a protected people that said you don't have equal rights, but you can live as an autonomous Jewish community as long as you pay a tax called the jizya, which is based on every male, every working, able-bodied male in the community, okay? And there's a head of the community who's responsible for collecting this tax and giving it to the sultan, all right? That's the community they lived in. They had certain privileges, but they also had certain restrictions based on the Pact of Oman, which said, and these laws were, I want to say, enforced over time based on the economy, based on different conditions at the time. So lots of times you might hear Jews lived among the Arabs very peacefully, that they didn't have any problems. It really depended on the economy, it depended on the time period, because they didn't really have rights, but they were involved in commerce, and these were people who were their neighbors. It was like separate but not equal, okay? So they had a Chacham Bakshi, which was a chief rabbi. They had a head of the community, and these people had moved from northern Italy, Livorno, to Damascus, and to Aleppo. So now, what happens when the indigenous Jews are now infiltrated by all these Jews who are coming from Italy, right? Okay. So we know that trade was in cotton and silk along the caravan route, and the Suez Canal had opened in 1869, and that just kind of killed their caravan route. The Industrial Revolution destroyed the economy there. Boys had a kitab education, which basically means they went to 7th grade, they finished their bar mitzvah, and that was it. They had a religious education, no secular education until the Alliance comes in the late 1800s. Girls had no education, girls stayed home. You learned from your mother, women never went out in this society. The hack homes on the street did not have windows that faced into the old city, into the Alhama. You had windows that faced into a courtyard. You went into a courtyard. You lived in something called a hush. And in that hush, you had a central courtyard, central kitchen that was shared. Okay? So after the expulsions, what happens? You've got all these Western Sephardim coming in, and they're known as Senores Francos, Spanish-Portuguese Jews, or in the Italian, Signora Franci, or in Arabic, Francis. And a lot of them were conversos, had been and returned to Judaism. Okay? Now, there's a problem with these people, okay? And the problem is they have European protection under the capitulations. They're European citizens, okay? They don't want to be divvied. They don't have to be divvied, okay? They don't have to adhere to the local laws, all right? They refuse to pay communal taxes. I'm not paying the Jews tax. I'm not supporting, but they'll donate to the local institutions. They'll donate to the synagogue. They'll donate to the bridal fund. They'll donate to the fund for the poor. But they're not they do not believe they're subject, they believe they're superior. Okay? And as a result, they're exempt from Ottoman law. They're protected as Europeans under Ottoman law. And this causes friction between them and the local community. All right? So in 1775, we have Rabbi Lanyado issues an edict which basically says, these guys, you've been around here, you've been here over 150 years, you got to get with the program. You've got to start adhering to our local laws, and you have to start adhering to the local customs of our community. You are not separate. And it took a while for them to do that, but they do, right? 1906 comes and the Ottoman Empire falls. And when the Ottoman Empire falls, something happens that spurs emigration. As dhimmi, they did not have to serve in the military. They were protected. When 1906 comes, 1907, you have the fall of the empire, you have the Young Turks take over, dhimmi status ends, and these guys, suddenly you see people disappearing off the street, and they go into military conscription, and it's for 25 years. Okay? My grandfather was one of them. And as a result, what happens is that people start emigrating. You also have an economic situation. Some people had gone already in the 1890s to Egypt because the Suez Canal was causing a real economic problem. Basically what happens is now all of these people are moving, and they move to London, they move to Egypt, then they go to by 1906, 1907, they're going to the Americas. People who couldn't get into New York, to the U.S., they're going to Mexico City, they go to Buenos Aires, and parallel communities start to pop up in these places with all of these same names, all right? Now, I'm not going to go on because what happens eventually, my time is out, but to summarize, over the last 100 years, all three communities, and I believe in São Paulo as well, emerge on a similar track. They establish their own communities. They establish their own sociologically in a place where you can't possibly imagine it. Synagogues, mikvah, burial society, senior citizen homes, small business administration, small business loans, a complete community in a city that they built based on donor funds. Okay? An emergence happened where, remember, these people were not educated people coming out of Syria. They were not educated at all. They were very religiously educated, but not secularly educated. And over the 100-year period, what happens is they come to America, at least in New York, children are attending public school. And in the 60s, when you had the civil rights movement hit the United States, and you have forced busing, there's suddenly a movement toward private yeshivas and yeshiva education. But they have no professional class. So who's teaching in your yeshivas? The Orthodox from the Ashkenazi community. So now they have to start emerging into a professional class. And a global economy emerges because They developed the professional class. Their kids are now going to college and going on to graduate school. And they go from being peddlers on the Lower East Side of Manhattan to retail stores to wholesale, import, export, and they're traveling all around the globe, okay? Specifically in China, in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, in the Philippines, and they open up all children's wear and electronic businesses. And now you've got these people who went from Spain to Portugal, to Aleppo and Damascus, to the Americas in a complete time. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Our next speaker is Professor Nancy Rozenchan. Professor Rozenchan is a professor of Hebrew and Jewish literature and Hebrew languages at the Universidade de Sao Paulo and a member of the curator committee of the Jewish Museum of Sao Paulo and also a translator of Hebrew literature.
On the one hand, the history of new Christians and their faith is better known today, but on the other hand, people living here at the other side of the ocean about Portuguese Ashkenazi Jews and about those who went from Portugal to Brazil. Because of their small number, they were never noticed or recorded, and the mere mention of their existence raises curiosity. The present report on immigration, the installation of Ashkenazi Portuguese and Jewish women in São Paulo, is restricted to 3 places we have been living there for more than 50 years. The unmistakable accent and intonation, such specifically, is not found in any other Jewish group that migrated to Brazil, and approximately the same age served as stimulus to evaluate several identity data that built their Jewish and Portuguese identity at first, and the Jewish, Portuguese, and Brazilian identities afterwards. Of the 3 Portuguese ladies, Lili Wiesenbroek, Dina Neumann, and Fanny Gelerte da Costa Lopes, only the first one was born in Portugal. Dina Neumann was born in Israel. Fanny Gelerte da Costa Lopes, the oldest one of them, was born in Berlin in 1923, and with the growing repression promoted by Nazi laws, left the country with her father and sister in 1935. The first 2 ones knew one the other since Lisbon, but never had contact with the third interviewee. Ashkenazis are of diverse origin, something that is exemplified in the 3 interviews either by the language of communication or by Morse. Although Fanny Gelerte was born in Germany, her family was originally from Odessa. Fanny's parents went to Germany in 1918, while other family members on their way to the United States stopped in Lisbon in the middle of the route. This would eventually entice the Gelertes to seek refuge there when the survival of Jews in Germany became unsustainable. As Sephardic Jews felt the doors of the old country open for them after the dark centuries of the Inquisition, they returned to Portugal. In order to lead the Jewish life, they needed people with compatible training to conduct the prayers and other activities. In spite of the Sephardic rite of which they were fond, more than once they had to rely on the religious authorities of Ashkenazi origin who were willing to conduct the religious services and the Sephardic ritual. It was this function that attracted the parents of Lili Wiesenbroek. They arrived in Lisbon in 1927 when Wiesenbroek took his first position in the synagogue. Dina Neumann's family also settled in Lisbon for work in the field of religious practice. Her grandfather, Samuel Muchnik, from Ukraine, went to Lisbon where he initially acted as liturgical singer and mohel, and later published materials of community interest. From this background, it's clear that 2 of the families of the interviewees were deeply attached to Judaism, and the maintenance of religious tradition and practices was only a natural trait. The Jewish experience in the early years and the adolescence of the interviewees is clearly delineated and intimately associated with the Portuguese life of that time in large cities. Lily attended the Parisian College of Lisbon, a Catholic school, but this did not imply participation in religious services or activities. Lily's kosher food was brought daily from home. She did not see any embarrassing or offensive act or gesture to her religious practice. Like Lily, Dina also spent her childhood and adolescence in a traditional Jewish family in Lisbon. Her mother was born in the country and her father came from Warsaw. Dina attended the same school as Lily. Both homes in Lisbon preserved kashrut, and the Jewish precepts were strictly adhered to. Both women report intense Jewish practice and participation in the various groups and activities that occupy the community. Attendance at the synagogue was usual on Saturday morning prayers, to which all of them went by foot. Sabbath afternoons were dedicated to activities in the Aveiro movement of Zionist directive. Dina recalls the various pompous celebrations of the main dates of the Jewish calendar: theater and dance at Purim, celebrations of Rosh Hashanah, Passover, Simchat Torah in the synagogue hall, where the four Chatanei Torah wore their most elegant attire. Both emphasize the Jewish practices performed at home, the imported kosher meat, the wine, the typical dishes of the parties, the shochet in charge of chicken slaughter. Based on these reports, one can conclude together with the interviewees that they were Ashkenazi, connected to Sephardic practices according to the Portuguese model. At the end of the school term, Lily turned to higher education. Dina, in turn, followed Zionist ideals and went to Israel to fulfill a 2-year Akshara period by the Maccabi Hatzair youth movement. The comfortable Portuguese Jewish ambience was one of the tones pointed out by the two Lisbonians. From the Portuguese language heard at home, along with other languages, to friendships in the community, whether with Sephardic or Ashkenazi, friendships constituted the school or outside the community, the sense that they did not face discrimination, together with the comfortable social-cultural level which they enjoyed, were the factors that defined the Portuguese periods of their life. Fanny's experience was different. Her formative years and experiences went through other paths. Fanny heard different language reflecting other aspects of Ashkenazic life. She heard Yiddish during childhood, when her mother, who spoke Russian in daily life, wanted to express affection for her daughters. The father read Russian books and told her about what that rich literature expressed. In Berlin, Fanny's language was German. It was in this language that she received in the school the first blows that shocked her a lot about her Jewish condition. The relation to greet Hitler's photo, the cursing by a colleague, and finally the director's call to inform that she could not continue to study for being Jewish. The following school period in the Jewish secular school Theodor Herzl in Berlin was largely pleasurable. The departure from the country only took place in 1935, when the father obtained the formal call to Lisbon through the brother-in-law, who had lived there or here for years. Fanny laughed frankly as she remembered the arrival at the city, its clear houses, its atmosphere less subdued than that of Berlin, the newspaper vendors, the uncles awaiting them. She loved the city immediately. Its structures reminded her of a play with Moorish images. The laughter and evoked images are the most obvious example of how the Portuguese capital was imprinted on her feelings. Soon Fanny and her father and sister settled in Porto. Fanny had to learn new habits, and she did it between amazement and fun, and accepted them easily. As for Jewish customs, she followed some of her cousins, and other acquaintances already embodied in local society, which married non-Jewish Portuguese, a fact which, however, often did not involve religious conversion on either side. Even without frequent attendance at the synagogue, Fanny's house was a practicing Jewish home with gentle customs. For her and her relatives, being Jews was an obvious matter without this implying anything to be shown or displayed. Mastery of Portuguese language was achieved thanks to the lessons given by a young man from a refugee family, and also by copying the unknown words as she heard them from the maid. Already at the age of 14, faced by economic difficulties, she began to teach German. In Porto, entertainment, youth amusement, and flirtations were not circumscribed to the limits of the Jewish community. Several marriages occurred outside the original circle, which led to an expansion of personal circles. Fanny recalls her youth feelings about the concept of Jew in Portugal. It did not make any sense to Portuguese in general. They didn't know what was a Jew. In remembering inter-ethnic marriages, Fanny's feeling of that decade is that for families it mattered most that the children were happy and that religious practice was not enforced. The three interviews' departures moment from Portugal points to totally different paths. Lily followed her father, Rabbi Diesendruck, at the end of 52, who left to work in Brazil. Since there was nothing new about the language or Jewish practice, acclimatization was comfortable. Sometime later, Lily got married to American entrepreneur Eliot Dranoff. Dina's departure from Portugal was planned. She settled in Israel for a certain period of training in agriculture and other tasks, the preparation for the definitive installation in the country. In 1956, she got married to Eric Neumann, whom she already knew from Lisbon. After the marriage, they returned to Lisbon, and in 1957, they left for São Paulo. He went to work in São Paulo. Fanny's path was different. At the age of 18, she got married to the Portuguese free thinker Assírio da Costa Lopes. For work reasons, both left Portugal and settled on a sisal farm in Angola. Lily's and Dina's Jewish life in new country was freely a practice in the communities which they chose and that welcomed them, as they had always lived with Sephardic and Ashkenazi communities. They did not find unsurmountable differences in the adaptations in the Jewish communities in São Paulo. Lily usually followed the Orthodox course of her parents and the siblings. Dina, of more liberal formation thought, was immediately linked to synagogues that followed this line. For the just married Fanny, Angola did not offer the environment for Jewish practice since she lived on a rural property. On the farm among the black locals, she gave birth to her first children, and afterwards in the capital, where the families moved in the 50s, Fanny continued to devote herself to the creation of the family, which occupied her pleasurably, fulfilling the purpose of her life. Created in developed cities, one can imagine that the trip to Angola represented a drastic change in her life. In an interview, Fanny reveals how it was possible to face the sisal-covered expanse as far as the eye could see and the suffering from malaria. We pretended, we pretended that we were in Europe. White people kept their position and did not mix with blacks. They were our servants, they worked everything out. There was a lot of racial segregation. I was aware that this situation was wrong, but I could not change anything. I had to adapt. Among the blacks, in poverty, we lived as if we were in Porto. The farmhouse was good, big, and all the comfort there was guaranteed by the blacks. They provided our water, for example. I worked at home with the kids. However, the intense connection by correspondence with their father, sister, uncles, and cousins fulfilled the role of keeping her linked with the main dates and celebrations of the Jewish calendar, and instigated the maintenance of some customs, such as the preparation of dishes of Jewish cooking, which were mixed with those of Portuguese cuisine. At the farm, a servant was taught to prepare the traditional fish dish, the gefilte fish. But the impossibility of fulfilling the traditional celebrations was cause of sadness. When she moved to Luanda, it was not difficult to establish contact with the few Jewish families who live in the Angolan capital. But with them, as well as with non-Jewish friends, Jewish identity was not subject of conversation. From fans' accounts, when they passed to Luanda, there was no expression of Jewish practice. Due to acculturation, the circle of interest encompassed life in Angola itself and the pressing problems of struggles, dependence, and wars with the ruling nation. The circle of friends was basically anti-Salazarist. Among them, Fanny highlights the political activist Tito de Moraes. She is indebted to him for the idea of transferring to Brazil. In face of the revolt that broke out in Angola, which, in the case of Fanny's family, would entail the compulsory enrollment of the children in the fight, she took the decision to return to Porto with the whole family. However, it would also not be possible to prevent the children from being summoned to fight. At the suggestion of Tito de Moraes, they decided to settle in Brazil. And thanks to the French influence, the couple and their 4 children were welcomed in several houses that gave them shelter until they could rent a house. While her husband, Assírio, was in a few days' time in a job, it was up to Fanny to provide everything necessary for the family. It was through the schooling time of the youngest daughter that Fanny entered in contact with a virus of Jewish community with which she maintained a great affinity. When Ruth began to study in the Sholem Aleichem school, a progressive school that was based on Jewish education, rooted in the Yiddish secular culture, and which stood out for the school project that privileged its political cultural insertion in the Brazilian context. Fanny's Brazilian and Brazilian Jewish experience was formed from the beginning with her attachment to the school as a mother of student and volunteer activist, intense participation in the activities where she was well succeeded and got a great and long-lasting friendships. In the following years, it was Fanny too, in the celebrations of the Jewish festivals in the houses of these friendly families, led the explanation of the festival's meaning. Years later, Fanny returned to her first form of sustenance, teaching German classes. Now suffering from religious division, but with a spirit that does not allow her to be defeated, she uses special equipment to continue the task she so much appreciates. Lily's affectionate connection with friends in Portugal are manifested by the bonds she keeps with those who live here, or here in Lisbon. Dina also continues to visit the country of origin and keeps close ties with relatives and friends who live in Lisbon. Fanny, as well as her descendants, also preserve the contacts. To this day, Fanny, who fulfills Judaism without impositions, but with sentiment, addresses the synagogue at the end of Yom Kippur along with one of her children. She relies on one of the new great-grandson to keep the Jewish bond going on. Lily and Dina, in compliance with the traditional commandment, carry out intense voluntary activity. Lily works in the cultural sector of Vitso and Temiad that provides social assistance. For 50 years, Dina collaborated with the Israeli Paulista congregation. Nowadays, she cooperates with Khabenskaya, visits Jewish patients in hospital, and offers them material to celebrate the important dates. For her, it is the most important task she performs, and that provides her the main feeling of accomplishment. In short, of the 3 Portuguese women can be said they have fulfilled and continue to fulfill their social, family, and community commitments inside and outside the Jewish community. Funny statement a few years ago corroborates this, and even if it wasn't expressed in words by the other two interviews, it is confirmed by their presence and activity in Brazil and for Brazil. Quotation from family: I am a convicted Jewish, a nationalist, very loyal to my group, and I am amazed at how much guilt they attribute to the Jews. There is a big anti-Semitic wave. People do not know what it means to be Jewish. At the time of Nazism, I was expelled from school. But I tell you that this did not turn me sad. Nazism gave me the strength to feel Jewish. My husband, although he was not a Jew, understood me and protected me. Thank you.
I thank the three speakers. Yes.
Paulo asked me if it is possible to host the discussion at a quarter hour before.
I can close this right now.
Yeah. So this is
I thank the
1
three
hour
speakers.
before?
I thank the three speakers.
We should finish about now. We finish. I don't know. At 5 exactly.
You know I'm cruel. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
I want to ask Sarina.
Hi.
I grew up in São Paulo, I told you, and we grew up with people coming whose families came from Lebanon, from Syria, from Egypt as well. And it's a question not from a scholar, from someone who's really curious. These two branches, the local Middle Easterns and the Iberian Jews, like my friends, they didn't know about these two trends. Like when in the 20th century, these groups were totally...
The 20th century, the two groups were totally merged.
They were merged.
But because they were merged in the late 1700s, around 1775, the rabbi said, you know, we're done with this. You've got to get with the local program. So by 150 years later, when we're in the Americas, that separation doesn't exist. But what does exist is that there's still a separation between the Jews of Aleppo and the Jews of Damascus, because realize that those two cities are 150 miles apart. So when they come to America, they don't know each other. So they're on the, like in New York, they're on the Lower East Side of New York, and you've got the Damascus Jews, they call themselves the Shamis, and the Aleppo Jews, who are the Halabis, and they have different synagogues. Even though they're from the same country, they don't know each other. And it was like treason if a Halabi married a Shami. You know, it was like, you know, World War II was breaking out because you were marrying out. Never mind marrying a non-Jew, you were marrying from like another community. So that took a while to merge. Now, so now these two communities started in the 1910, 1920. You've got the burial societies created, and the two synagogues are created. Those two synagogues still exist today. They're known as the Shami and the Halabi synagogue. It's unlike Mexico City, where Mexico City, you have an umbrella community. So it's formed on the European model. And the umbrella community is you're a Halabi or you're a Shami. And that's it. They don't mix. And if a Halabi woman marries a Shami male, then they go with the Shami community. It's not vice versa. So they have to choose which community they belong to and which communal institutions they're going to belong. You have to belong to something. In New York, it doesn't work that way. There's no umbrella. You belong to a synagogue. You can support the Bikur Halim. You can support. There's no umbrella at all. So there are communal institutions, but there's no community and community head the way there is in Sao Paulo, in Mexico City, in Buenos Aires. That doesn't exist. So it does take a while, but by my generation, I'm second generation American, so by my generation, you still had a little friction when a Shami married a Polish. By the third generation, it was kind of forgotten. However, there's still a little bit of a class system in that the richer families kind of know who the richer families were, and the poorer families know who the, like when I was dating, you never dated that guy. Like if I was dating a guy that my family thought they were, if my parents thought they were from a family that was not up to our class, so to speak, you know, they would say you can't date him, you know, and that kind of thing among families, on family names, still exists. But now we're marrying Ashkenazi, and so that's like, you know, oh, that's like a biggie.
Okay, thank you. And anyone else?
Professor Nancy Rozenchan, also, so I'll speak English. What is the name, please? I couldn't understand the name of the third woman. Not Lily, not Dina.
Fanny Gelerter.
Fanny?
Gelerter da Costa Lopes.
Thank you.
Very nice woman.
Okay.
She's my cousin.
What?
Yes, she's my cousin.
Yeah, she told,
Yeah.
Miriam told me someone might be here.
Oh, yeah.
Lieberman?
Lieberman, yeah.
And you that is our cousin.
I didn't ask you something. You made some research about that small city in the frontier of Samora.
I'm sorry, say it again.
You made some research about the Jewish people of that small city in the frontier with Portugal that belongs to the Zamora district.
So my book is branching out from Sephardic, and it basically goes through the entire history of Jews from Iberia to Syria to the Americas. And it follows not only the genealogy, but biographical information, and it also has really early roots. There's a chapter on the early roots of Jews on the Iberian Peninsula and the archaeological evidence that shows that they were on the Iberian position even pre-Christianity.
And this is a very well-known family, it's the Carvajal family.
The Cassans, you mean the Cassans? Carvajal, yes.
They came from Fremocele. That is a small city now, in the other side of the River Douro. And not only the Carvajal, but some important people came from Rio de Frontier. It is where they were converted in spite of the coming in Portugal. That is normal, and they converted to Christianity. But
see, I was focusing on the families that ended up in Aleppo.
Okay.
And in Syria. So that was my focus.
Okay, I think that will be it. Thank you all.